Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of 3GIQ. Our guest today is JJ Racaza. JJ was born in the Philippines and started shooting at 6 years old, currently a professional shooter for Beretta and the reigning USPSA Carry Optics National champion. JJ worked for the Department of Homeland Security as a federal agent and is widely sought after for his instructor credentials and charismatic persona. I've taken a couple of classes from JJ. He's largely instrumental for my development as a USPSA shooter and a practical shooter overall. First question I'd like to start with, JJ, and thanks for coming on, by the way.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah. Going through your phased approach to training. So phase one is more or less development of fundamentals. You have three pillars, right? Marksmanship, movement, and then was speed the last one, or?
Yeah.
Okay. Phase two is where you basically take those pillars and you explore and you find your 100% and a little bit of failures involved. And phase three is where you make sure that you can perform those things on demand. There's something that you said in the first class I took from you. Sometimes you introduce a element of like consequence to phase three. You said that you like if you don't perform at a certain level, you wouldn't be able to eat pork for a week. Or you'd say early on that like if you weren't transitioning fast enough, that your dad would be there to literally stab you with a needle if you didn't transition fast enough. Is that still present in the way that you practice today? And how important is the concept of like losing something tangible or having a consequence to your training?
Having something tangible that you lose on training creates some sort of pressure that you can recreate that you don't normally have in your normal practice. What I'm trying to do now is not only work on my physical hard set skills, but I'm also working on my mental skills, because I realized that throughout the years of me competing, it's really not at a certain point in your career, it's almost not to the point of it's your skill set. It's really your mindset and mental state that falls apart. So I start to create that and try to recreate that. And the only way I've ever really successfully recreated and adding some sort of pressure, the knots on your stomach, is by creating some sort of, yes, these are the prices you pay if you don't do this right now. So I'll create certain expectations, level of expectations, because that's what it is, right? When you go to competition, you have this certain level of expectation, whether it's coming from you, your training team, or the people you shoot for. And now that I shoot for a company and my dad and everyone's whatever, everyone has a certain level of expectations. Like, hey, you won this or nationals, you got to try to win it again next year, or can't place worse than third, or anything like that, even though it's a new game whatsoever. And then so I create that level of expectation of me in practice, and I create it on each and every single string that I run once I'm in phase three. However, when I'm in through developmental phase one and phase two, I'm constantly looking for how far and how quickly, how much I can push my current physical hard skill sets. It's when I go to phase three that I lock those in. And when I feel like I got it where I need it to be, where I'm tuned in correctly, where I feel like this is a good match phase, this is where I feel like I'm still on the edge, but yet not quite on it, where a small little mistake will push me fall over the edge. Enough of a buffer to create that buffer, right, to go up or down on it and stay consistent. That's when I start creating these little penalties for myself. I say, hey, if you don't do this, if you don't shoot 95% of your points on this particular drill, then I'm going to take away your rice this week. I won't eat rice for a week. I'm like, and in my head, I'm like, that really sucks because I love rice, right? Asian and all that stuff. I used to tell you I take my cell phone away, but then I was like, I realized that was such a big break and good break for me, and I enjoyed it. So I was like, no, food. I'm such a foodie. Or take away protein shakes. Like if you take that away from me, since I don't get to eat meals often, those are like replacements for me. I start to suffer greatly in regards to like just my overall stable emotional self at home.
Yeah, that's funny. So you're the core of you is rice, pork, and protein shakes.
100%. Yes. You take away steak, that's another thing. Rice is another thing. Oh, all those.
Makes sense. In phase three, would you say that you were your toughest critic? You've talked about how your dad coaches you through a lot of stuff, but are you your toughest critic?
Me or my dad?
Either or. Like, did that change throughout your career?
So yes, it's kind of weird. It's kind of like a evolution, right? Like a circle, right? It started off as my dad being really harsh and expected a lot of me in the beginning. And a lot of that comes to the story behind it. And there's a little backstory to that. And maybe we can get into it a little bit later. But in the beginning, when I was younger, he expected a lot. He would train me so hard and he wanted me to get it right away. And there was a lot of pressure on learning things quick because at such a young age, I knew the price to pay was not really good. Once my dad got angry or anything like that, if I didn't learn what he was trying to do, or if I didn't execute how he wanted me to execute. And then somewhere in between there, now let's say mid-20s to mid-30s, around 10-year span, I was harder on myself than he was on me. He kind of took a step back and was like, hey, you're doing really well, just maintain. And he kept accepting a lot of things. And as of late, again, it's kind of like I've taken it easy on myself. I think maybe I've gotten myself softer in regards to my approach, and go, I've done fairly well recently. And I start taking a step back a little bit. And my dad had to kind of almost essentially create a balance in there and step in and take that role again and going, hey, I don't accept that. That's not good enough. We should look into it. I don't think, even though I know you don't agree with it, we need to look into it and we need to train that because that's a weakness. And sometimes when he says that, initial response is like, what are you talking about? Like, why is that a weakness? Like, don't tell me I have a weakness when I feel like I'm coming together right now. And then, obviously give me some time, an hour later, 2 hours later, maybe a day later, I start to realize, I'm like, man, he's right. That is a weakness. That's something that I struggle on. All right. And then I get into my own head and start writing down notes. Like, all right, why is this a weakness? How do we approach it? And sometimes I don't know how, but I know why is a weakness. And I just figure out like, all right, this is the directions I'm going to go. I'm going to try to approach it here and I'm going to instill it in my training. I'll do more of this to make sure that doesn't happen in the next match. And it's always right. Like everything's performance based for us. So our training and trial and error is in training and practice. In competition is when we basically put ourselves to the test and see if our training was correct and implemented correctly. So my dad's been there, man. It's awesome to have him that constantly push me in check because I don't know if I'd be where I'm at if I didn't have him. Same with my wife too. My wife has one mode. She expects a lot of me every single time. She's like, sometimes I get nervous for a class. I'm like, hey, I'm not sure if I can do this right. This class is going to be a tough class. I'm really nervous. I'm concerned about this. This is a 4-day class with these high-end elite military guys. And she's like, hey, trust you. You're going to crush it. And I'm like, give me a little bit of buffer there. Like, hey, maybe you'll be all right. Maybe you won't. And she's like, no, you're going to crush it. And then at the end of the week, I'm like, whoa, we made it. She's like, I told you. I'm like, gosh, dang, like you don't give me a choice. Like, give me an out sometimes. Give me another road to take. But she's like, no, take this one. So both of them, man, it's awesome. Like I said, it's awesome to have a team like that and people behind you to either constantly call you out on your BS or just simply steer you in the right direction when you've gotten soft in yourself.
So it's clear that based on your social media, that fitness is an important aspect of your life. How much of your workout routine is enhancement, like setting PRs, building strength and speed, versus maintenance, stretching, recovery, active recovery type exercises? And how has that changed throughout your shooting career?
That's a great question. Early on in my career, like I would say, not early on, but I would say when I started really getting into hard workouts and stuff like that, 2008, 2006, I started really hitting it really hard then. And I noticed the initial difference of the stability of my gun when I come in a position, the ability to stop all this extra movement that didn't seem so noticeable, but I saw it on videos. Now that was like the time when we started really studying some videos of my movement. And then so I got into it really hard where I started really exploring things like CrossFit and Olympic lifts and core and yoga and all these, HIIT workouts. And I tried to do everything that I needed to do, figure out strengthening and all this stuff, right? And in the beginning there, a lot of it was hitting PRs, hitting your numbers, hitting like the mile at under 5 minutes or hitting a 3 mile in around 20 minutes or something like that, whatever it may be, right? Like those are some of my PRs, my lifts and power lifts and all that stuff. Like those are numbers. I was chasing numbers at the end. In the beginning. Sometime as of late, I would say within the last 4 years, I haven't quite chased numbers as much, but I do test them and see if I can hit them still. So I'm not pushing my PRs anymore. I'm also 42 years old, so I don't do that. Like the other day or 3 months ago, I went and see if I could hit the 315 back squat and see if I can, go down as deep as I could. And I was able to hit that. So I was very happy to do that. But normally I'm operating within the 85, I would say 50 to 75 or 50 to 85% range. And I'm essentially doing a lot more recovery and maintenance now, like stretching, more active recoveries. I'm doing a lot more low impact stuff like on the bike, and the Peloton was a new thing, or the bike at least was a new thing, because that gave me an opportunity to see my points and score. And if you give me points and score, or at least a ranking in a bike or anything that I do, that ends up eating me up and figuring out how to make that better. And so those are things that I'm constantly chasing right now. But everything else in regards to my workout has been a lot about maintenance. However, there's still, I would say, if I would give you a percentage early on in my career, 80% was all about chasing numbers. It was all about getting higher bench press and all that stuff. Once I got to like the 300s, I was happy with that, right? And then recently, now it's more 80% maintenance and recovery, and about 20% of those I'll go really hard, whether it's a Metcon that I'm chasing, or if it's a numbers game I'll do. So I'll build up to it like a hatch squat program. I'll get into that every 3 or 4 months, and that's a lot of reps of just straight up legs every day. Every other day, if anything.
So I kind of have an additional question to add to this, because you spoke about numbers, and it made me think back to whenever I was younger. Back when I was in my early 20s, I was much of the same. I was chasing those numbers. A mile, my best mile was 4:25. 3 mile was 16:30. Like, that's all I lived for. I ran twice a day. I swam and I lifted. And it wasn't as much of a functional fitness workout as it was just like, hey, I have a goal. I want to achieve this. I wanted to get down a 15-minute 3 mile. Like, that was a legit goal at one point. I'm older now, and I guess what I'm trying to get at is, how do you look back at what you've done in terms of back then you were chasing numbers? And, to me, I look at back what I used to do, and I'm like, man, I'm never going to see those times again. And you don't want to get down on yourself, but you're like, what have I become? How do you get through those stumps in recognizing that?
It's really cool that you say that, right? And there's two things. I look at it as this way. I looked at it as that was my phase 2 in regards to my programming. If I had to talk about it in regards to my shooting, I was finding out what my 100% was, right? But those 100% in regards to those numbers and being able to having the ability to run that fast and all this stuff, we had like a 1.5 mile quarterly things that we had to do. And my goal was always to go under 9 minutes in a 1.5 mile, right? And that was always the goal. And I was dying by then, by the way. But anyway, with all that said, like, I remember thinking back then that was my new 100%. So now wherever I'm at, because I've reached those numbers, I didn't fall far from it. Right. So I try to maintain. It's easier to maintain a higher level because we reach that level at a certain point in our career. However, I always look at it and going, man, I'm never going to touch those. Maybe I can. I still have that thought that maybe I still can chase it. It'll hurt a lot. Like, I don't know if my knees can sustain it. However, the big thing that I start to think now is very purpose driven. I go, did running a mile under 5 minutes, did it really translate into making me a better shooter? And then I start thinking about it. Maybe the way I was in shape, I was maybe because I had more muscles in my legs and all that stuff. Maybe that might have considered, but having that mile, maybe not so much. Like, so I was like, all right, we don't need to run that much. Maybe under 6 minutes is good enough for now. So running under 6 minutes, okay, so let me test that and see how that translates. Is this better for my sprinting ability? Is this better for my weight management and stuff like that? Because if I get too heavy, my knee starts to hurt a little bit when I run long distance. My long distance is like 3 to 5 miles max, right? I don't long distance at all. My wife is a runner, not me. So that's how I look at it. Does this allow for me to become a better, essentially, performer out there in the competition world? So I realized that having a more stable posterior chain is much more important. So I do a lot more deadlifts now. So my deadlifts has gone up. That one, I'm not chasing quite the numbers, but I know I can do higher reps than I ever will have been before because of how much how much volume I'm doing now with it. So I'm more comfortable pulling. For a while there, I was afraid to pull heavy weights with that. Now I know I can pull way heavier than before, and more reps. And I don't go for my max, but I know that that's important to me, having a stable core and all that stuff. So a lot of it's performance based, and that's how I keep myself motivated, essentially.
Okay, no, thank you.
So I brought up that question mostly because military is hard on your body. And a lot of our listeners, like Matt's at the end of a long career, 20 years, like And I mean, he's still getting ready for tactical games at the end of the month, so he's still
Oh,
kicking ass. But some of us, like, you know, we deal
We're
with
broken. We're broken.
physically, not mentally. But yes, a lot of us are dealing with those things. So I would, my next question is like just some insight into some of the setbacks that you might have experienced. I know in one of the classes I took with you, you talked about like overuse injuries, like a variation of tennis elbow. What are some like crucial like mental touch points during recovery? Like how important is positivity? How important is your scheduling? Those kinds of things.
man, I don't know if I've really been a good person to ask that question because I've never really been able to. I don't know. Man, that's such a good question because, you know, I've had golfers, both hands. I've had golfers elbow, and then I had the tennis elbow to the point where the doctor asked me, he's like, hey, there's two things you can do with it. You can either just let it rest and not do anything, or second, he goes, you're just going to continue to work it and stretch it out. Your tendons are just gonna keep up with it eventually, right? And then so I did it, and then I blew out my tendon. I pulled out some cartilage and all that stuff too. We almost had surgery on it, but anyway, I got lucky that didn't. So with that said, staying positive. Here's the thing with that. I've had some injuries where I'm like, shoot, I can't grip the gun tight. I got to do this, and I got to do certain things. So, you know, stretching and all that stuff is big. Learning to understand how your body works. Always doing this and never strengthening out the opposing muscles. Like doing quads all the time, like your hamstring gets weak, your knee starts to suffer. Like doing abs all the time without doing your lower back or Superman, your lower back starts to hurt. People, you know, like all this stuff is all just a balance essentially. So I try to make sure I stay balanced and I constantly check that. But the weird thing about me is that like mental checks, I get really sometimes like if I come up from a loss, I get really dark. My dungeon is my cage, my gym is my dungeon, and that's where I get really dark, and I end up really destroying myself so I can feel the pain. And if I can just feel that pain, I know I'm punishing myself because of how I feel, how I'm negative right now. And I was there actually just a couple months ago where I was just in a rut and I couldn't figure myself out. I was not motivated at all to train. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how much pre-workout I took, it just didn't feel right. I didn't want to do it. But I'm like, you know what? I'm going to continue to do it until I do it. And the worse I felt, the harder I tried to go, to the point where sometimes I started revisiting those phases of almost blacking out or getting dizzy in training. So that's why I don't think it's healthy. But eventually I got over it, right? And then all of a sudden one day I woke up and I'm like, oh, I can't wait to hit it today. And it, you know, that when I was in that dark phase, even going to the range, training sucked. Didn't want to dry fire, competing. During Maryland, Virginia State, I was in that mode. I was in that dark space where I didn't enjoy being there. It was just the people that I was there, and then I needed to show a face of one thing. But I was fighting my own battles in my head, and it came out on my performance. I was up and down the whole time. I would get dark, and then I would get really good again in the next stage, and then get real dark just before the stage. And I remember seeing that, talking to my dad about that. And my dad is so old school, man. He goes, "You're just being weak mentally." He goes, "You need to get stronger." I go, "I've been battling with this for the last couple of months. What do you mean weak?" So, you know, I don't know what to do there. And that's why I say I don't think I'm the best person to do it with, because I'm not always, even though it looks like I'm super positive always when I'm out there and whatever I show. But when I do get in that dark space, I am really dark. Like my wife will walk in the gym and she goes, "Oh, I know you're dealing with some stuff. Do whatever you got to do. But whenever you come back in with the kids or with me, just be present. That's all we ask. We don't need you to be extra. We just need you to be present and be here for us." And I said, sounds good. And that's always our deal, right? It's like, so never take it in. And so sometimes it's hard. So that's why I take it out in the gym as much as I can. And the gym's always been my outlet. Sometimes fighting, like training, striking, Muay Thai, whatever, is also a really good outlet for me, because I can either get hit, as long as I can feel pain, and the more pain I feel, the better I start to become. It's really, really weird, and I don't think that's healthy for anyone. So I don't advise it for anyone out there. But pain is my way out a lot of times.
I think what I pulled out from that is, man, like, I mean, it's hard to be consistent over so many years in terms of like operating at a high level and all that. And then sometimes like you don't have the same level of enthusiasm for things, but you still have to persist. Like the foundation still needs to be there. You and I brought this up when I ran to you at Maryland State, but back in September 21, I suffered a partial tear in my Achilles. And I went in a dark place for a while, man. Like that first weekend, I was like, Frank, you're gonna be a depressed piece of shit. Like you're probably gonna end up drinking all the wine in the house, like eat whatever you want, watch all the football, just sit on the couch, just feel sorry for yourself. But then the following Monday, like you need to go and you need to do your rehab. And it's gonna be tough. And like even throughout, I'm in a much better place now. You know, like this morning I was able to take the dog on a run through the trails. And then afterwards I got back and I hit weights. But even then, like running up a hill, there's like I still don't have that push off in my left foot. And there was this nagging thought, I'm like, dude, what if this is the rest of your life? Like your left ankle just never comes back all the way. And then the other side of me is like, shut the hell up. Like that's not productive thinking. Like get through it, you know? So in a weird way, I don't know if I said this at Maryland State. I do have some things to be thankful for in terms of my injury. It for the longest time, like it forced me to learn shooting on the move. That's the only way I could shoot stages. I basically had to like crawl my crippled ass around the stage and take everything on the move. Only way I could be somewhat competitive. Um, Out of any of the setbacks that you've experienced, have you ever seen any of those silver linings?
Dude, big thing. You just said it. I had a hairline fracture on my ankle, 2009, just 3 months before the Nationals or something like that. I was playing basketball and I landed on someone's foot, rolled it, and I was like, ooh, that's bad. I've never felt it crunch. I've never felt pain like this where I blacked out for a split second, right? And then only to find out that I had a hairline fracture and it was bruised up the next day and all that stuff. So I knew Nationals was coming in. It was like maybe a month or 2 months before. And Saul Kirsch has a video of me shooting at the time. There was no, my dad wasn't there, so he didn't take any videos. I was by myself in Vegas competing. And so when I had that leg, I remember moving around. It hurt so hard to push off, right? Like a hard push in order for me to get activated and run hard. And I knew, but if I started running, I could do okay. But lateral movement or sudden stops, didn't like it at all. And our sport is a lot of lateral movements and stuff like that, right? Leaning in weights and stuff. So I was like, man, what do I have to do in order for this to happen? This is supposed to be a year that I'm going to try out for the team for 2011. And this is the start of it all. And I need to be good at nationals. That's like the one tryout that it's coming no matter how injured you are. So all I did was I started utilizing other things. Like you said, I started learning how to efficiently exit and enter positions. I started realizing there's other ways to break, step, and you can utilize your other opposing foot to be able to still manage yourself to get into the right position and stuff like that. And then once I did that, it allowed for me to be able to explore other avenues of my movement. And now I talk about it, like now I don't always drop step. I might do lead foot pivot. And really that's when I started to really do what's called a lean. I started doing a lot of leans and stuff like that. So going to nationals, then you can see I had a plastic cast still wrapped around my foot. I had this oversized shoe that I had to fit in order for me to compete. And I was actually 2009. It's still very fresh in my head because I was winning the nationals. Luckily, winning the nationals somehow found myself in the lead going to the last stage, about 40 or 50 points. However, I had a catastrophic jam at the last stage that I didn't expect, and ended up third by 3 or 4 points off the winner, and then I ended up giving it to Max. Like everyone knew that was mine. Everyone was congratulating me, and then sure enough, something happened. It wasn't my time yet, I guess. Whatever it may be, whatever the reason was. I wasn't blessed to win the nationals. And so, yeah, I got hurt, but I remember thinking back, like even with a broken ankle, I was able to perform with this, not because I was running or stopping hard, but I was able to find different routes, different ways, different technique. And I know this will eventually serve me better later on in my career. And it truly has paid me tenfold.
Yeah, but good to hear that, man. Kind of want to change subjects a bit. So I listened to your interview with Brian Conley for the Hunters HD podcast. I thought that was I wasn't really interested in rehashing like your backstory for this podcast because I think he just did such a great job. But you talked about immigrating to the United States. I myself am from an immigrant family, and one of the things that I realized growing up is like I was the oldest of 3 kids, right? I kind of had to grow up a little faster because pretty quickly I was the most fluent English speaker in the house. I'd help my parents figure things out. I had to be example for my brothers, kind of like how you had to be for your sisters growing up. So a lot of the way, like you guys, you and your parents like sacrifice, come to the country, you learn things through hardship and persistence. What are some of the difficulties you have in like now that you're a father, translating those into your own kids?
The biggest difficulty right now for me is that I want to spoil them, right? I'm in a position where we can spoil them a little bit. We've worked hard, and I don't want them to go through what I went through. And then it's always a constant battle between me, my own head, and my wife and I talk about it a lot. It's like, are we spoiling them, and are we creating such a soft life for them that are we setting them up for failure? How do we instill to them the characteristics that we built up through a kid as we went through hardship, and we appreciate what we have, as opposed to them right now. It seems like everything just kind of comes into the way. So that's kind of one of the big hardships that we are constantly battling with right now. The kids, man, it's crazy because the kids wake up in this brand new house. They get air conditioning, get nice Tempur-Pedic beds. Where I slept on floors. There wasn't always hot water. Like there was cold. You know what I mean? Like these things. But I don't want them to go through that. So we give them whatever we can give, because I don't want them to ever go through what I went through. However, at the same time, it's like the balance of, are we spoiling them? Are we creating too soft of a life for them? But at the same time, I don't want them to go through becoming hard. So really, there's a lot of talking between us. Like, hey, I want you guys to understand we can do these things because of these. And the reason why dad or mom works really hard is so we can provide for you guys. I want you guys to understand that you have to work for whatever you get. So anything that they get, most of the time, not a lot of times, not all the time, most of the time, they have to kind of work for it in order for them to get. So they kind of understand the value of work. If I can raise them to be respectful, kind, and just hard work, like that's all I want. So the way I try to instill that right now is show them that I'm working hard. I'm training my butt off in the gym, and they come in and visit. And now I can see that starting to translate, because they'll bust their butts and just join me out of nowhere. My son the other day, just 2 nights ago, did like 500 or 600 jump ropes just before bed, just because he saw me do a bunch of jump rope that morning. And he just picked it up and it's like, Dad, how do you do this? And he kept doing it until he got good with it, and he just started doing it. He's like, Dad, I'm up to 500. I'm like, well, you're done. And he's like, maybe I can do 100 more. I'm like, sounds good. And then so I ordered him jump rope. You know what I mean? Like these things. So I'm hoping that will just hopefully, I don't know, right, if we're doing it right or wrong. We got one thing to do it right, one or wrong, right? One chance to do it right or wrong. And I'll find out in a few years if we're doing it right or wrong. I just want to be there for them as much as I can and guide them, really. But as an immigrant, that's something I'm very proud of, and how we were able to live life, how my parents sacrificed that. I talk to them about that and give them a little bit of history, a little bit. My wife does it as much as more than I do. I don't like to talk about it much because sometimes it's kind of a dark space. My wife likes to be the one to talk to them about that and let them understand, like, hey, this is where Dad came from. This is how he got here, and this is the problems he went and faced through and stuff like that. So it's pretty, I don't know. So, that's how I do it. I don't know if that's the right way or wrong way. We'll find out in a few years, I guess.
Yeah, I think you guys are on the right track. I just remember like things that my parents would tell me growing up. Like I ran cross country, right? So like my shoes would wear out every few months, and they'd be like,
Oh,
when our shoes wore out, we just patched them up and kept going. It's like, yeah, but you guys weren't running as much as I was. But it's just some of those things, the things that you take for granted growing up in the States. It's hard to convey those things without seeming like you're just being capricious, for lack of a better word. Um, but yeah, I wasn't really appreciative of some of my parents' sacrifices until much later. And now I constantly, it's a measuring stick for myself. Like, would I be able to pick up and start a life in a new country like my mom and dad did? And I try to think about that at least once a week.
that's a good thought to have. I had a little preview of what my mom went through, my dad went through when we went to Vegas, and my wife and I were separated for a little bit because she had to continue to work with Secret Service while I started a business with the 2 kids, the 1-year-old and the 3-year-old in Vegas. And that was really, really hard. And then we only did that for like a year and a half, 2 years, where my mom did it for 10 full years of being in a different country, starting a different life, and establishing a life here so we can all kind of come here. So the two hardest persons I know in my life is really, my wife and my mom, like two females just crushing it out there. It's impressive to see how strong they are to be able to do that. So which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I gotta agree. On my side, like for me, my wife being probably one of the strongest people. It's like 4 or 5 months after my daughter was born, I was getting deployed.
Exactly.
Came
Oh,
came back a
oh,
year later, came back after like 6 months. A year later, back on another deployment. And then 5 months after I came back from that one, I'm gone for 13 months. And then I come to the team thinking, oh, it's going to be a bit of a break. Oh, no, on the road all the time. And, I really got to give a lot of props to her because she was so strong. We've been married, this December will be 17 years. So,
Wow.
so it's like, and she's only known me going on deployments, come back, deploy, coming back. Our daughter's 8 years old. And so, you know, I try and be that positive father figure to my daughter, but she totally goes to my wife because that's who she's known. And I understand that role. So now it's like, hey, time to make up that time.
Correct.
And I mean, I'll be able to do that pretty soon here in about a month. Well, realistically,
That's
a
so
week.
that's so awesome because there's gonna be an adjustment, right? Like you live your own life when you're traveling. Like both of you guys
Hmm.
live your own lives. Like you have your own routine. Like every time I
Yep.
come home from a trip or long trip, and you know this better than I do, you mess up the routine. The whole house gets
Oh
all like
yeah.
a bomb just goes up, and the wife's like, "You're not helping at all. You're messing up the whole thing." Right? There's so much more, and I'm like, "There's two of us now. We should be able to help out each other." But it's all messed up for a little bit. So my
Oh
wife's
yeah.
always like, "You're screwing things up," and
Yep.
then you get in a dynamic and you get into a flow, and there's an adjustment period for all of it, right? So yeah, you gotta learn to live with each other, and then
Yep.
still continue to live the life that you lived before that too.
And it's like my daughter, she'll like ask my wife for something. My wife would be like, no. And then she'll come to me, hey, daddy, can I have
Hell
this?
yes.
Sure. Yeah, I'll win you over. Let's do it. But no, I love
Oh,
your approach. Like, you know, I look at, you know, raising your kids. Are we doing it the right way? Are we spoiling them? Are we holding back when we need to? And are we teaching them the right lessons? And what can they learn from those lessons? So that was beautifully said.
oh, thank you, thank you.
Um, so switching real quick, another, the Brian Conley interview was like really good, and I really liked your response and what you had to say. But one of the anecdotes that really stood out to me on his podcast was whenever you were going through your air marshal training and you fired 3 headshots and then you fired 3 more headshots saying he wasn't down. So and they got pissed off at you. And they didn't believe that you were able to process the marksmanship in the environment at that pace. Would you characterize that most institutions' approach to marksmanship is focused more on phase one style of training, the marksmanship side, and not necessarily the speed? And what do you think can be done to push individuals in the military, federal agencies to pursue and understand a higher level of marksmanship?
Man, that's such a deep question. Yeah, that Brian really did a number on that podcast. I was in a like I said, I was in that dark space, right?
Mm-hmm.
May to like June. And when he started pulling out these things, the storytelling of just me, and then even me when I was telling the stories, I'm like, hold up a second, is this SSI? I don't know if I can continue. So I would have to like make up stuff as I went. I'm like, no, I gotta go away from that story and stuff like that. But anyway, the Brian did a good job with that one, so that's why it's funny. Like I was telling stories and I watch it, and I'm like, oh my god, I almost said so much. I'm like, good, I held back enough. But anyway, one of the things that I think we get a lot from being pushed to perform at such a pace, speed, and learn to call audibles on the fly in competition is the ability to process things at a much higher level, not only on the adjustment on your shooting, but the ability to understand the environment that's going on around you, whether it's the next position, the next door, the next activator, the timing's all screwed up. And sometimes we are spinning up our mind fast enough because now I gotta do an extra reload because I've had an extra shot, and we're trying to process these things, right? So we're constantly exposed to these higher processes. And so when I was thrown, and every time I've ever been thrown in any kind of tactics training, MT training, or movement training in regards to guns and stuff like that, shooting was never really the main priority for me. It was just more about reacting to the scenario. So I was able to focus more on scenario and think what I had to do, think about my partner, think about the crossfire, the position that I'm in, and all that stuff. So those were much easier for me to pick up because the shooting was so locked on. So with that said, having the ability to process is a huge, huge advantage. And I think a lot of that ability to process is because we're starting to think less about our shooting, and we're thinking about the scenario itself. And now we're present with what's currently going on, as opposed to like reacting. We're constantly in front and just ahead of what's going on. So I think in regards to the academy, I worked in an academy, and a lot of things that they did was literally work on, it was like 2 of the 3 phases in training. It was just straight up the accuracy and the marksmanship and movement. Not so much speed was ever involved. And the only time you ever saw speed is when we were in scenario based with role players or some sort of tactics game. And when speed got involved, because that was essentially their first time doing it, things fell apart. Marksmanship fell apart. They were shooting each other, shooting bad rounds, multiple rounds, and not seeing their sight picture, not even able to recall half the things that they did in regards to what the partner did, how they communicated their talk, and then add a little bit of stress in there, and things really got out the window. So one of the things that we started to do in the academy was I kept saying, it's like, hey, we need more speed-induced training. We need more speed-induced training. We can't just do this step 1, 2, 3, and 4 draw. We need to be able to just go as fast as we can. And one of the influences for me with that was this guy named Kelly Benden from and he was former Delta. He was I think his company's called Criterion Tactical. I don't know if he still runs it. He's maybe he fully retired. But Kelly Benden created this thing called triple nickel. And triple nickel was his idea, was to be able to push them outside of the rigor mortis of the deliberate movement and stage to stage breakdown. He wanted them to push through the speed and all that stuff. And so I said, hey, that works for a lot of folks and instructors. The difference between an instructor working to achieve the triple nickel time, which is 5 targets, 10 rounds, 2 shots per target at 5 yards. You have to do a reload in 5 seconds, right? Anywhere in between the first target and the last target, you have to reload in between. So there's a lot of things going on, from either concealment at the time and then now through whatever carry duty gear you have. And watching the instructors evolve, chasing this speed and the ability to go faster and faster and faster, I saw guys literally not only on their qualification score go skyrocketing up, but the ability to demo at a slower speed, which was their fast speed before, because they pushed one aspect in their game of shooting, which is speed. And once they were able to process whatever was going on at running 10 rounds with a reload in 5 seconds, it translated to what they did. Even though they weren't really good shots, it translated to what they did when in the marksmanship or accuracy part, because their processing was so much faster. And it also translated to their demo speed, even though to them, we'd had to tell them, like, hey, slow down a little bit more because things are going still too fast. Like, no, we've slowed down enough. All right, we'll slow down even more. We kept telling guys to slow down because things were happening so much faster to them. And now, and then you just saw it in that regard. So what I started to take in was, one time we did a test, Keevil. I don't know if you guys know Mike Keevil. We started to say, hey, let's push some speed. Let's grab like 3 or 4 students and let's just push pure speed on them. Let's go fast draw, 2 shots per target, 6-round rhythm drills in 3 different targets, L-Pres, 7-10 yards, over and over and over. And let's see what their shooting is in PPC, or the qualification score will be, and then how they go against a different group that we focus and follow the lesson plan of marksmanship, trigger, 1 shot and 15-yard, 2 shot, 25-yard, and all this stuff. The group A that we had, we focused speed. We never even left, I think, further than 12 yards. We kept pushing in speed at this a close distance, and just kept paying attention to their marksmanship and all this stuff, right? But at speed, we kept bringing their group down and tighter and tighter. Some of them we were able to push harder. Some of them we had to scale back a little bit. The other group, where we maintained, the group B, I'd say, we maintained the marksmanship, focus, accuracy, and all that stuff. We put them to test against each other in just 2 weeks. I think we had them about 6, 7, 8 hours total. In 2 weeks, we would put them against each other in the steel range. Group A smoked everyone by 100% in Group B. They couldn't understand the speed that these guys were operating on. They were just getting completely wiped out on the floor. Then we put them against in the qualification course. The qualification course is like from 3 yards to 7 to 10 to 15 to 25 with barricades, stuff like that. These guys, that Group A, never even shot past 15 to 25 yards. We just showed them how to shoot tight shots at close range, learning how to manipulate the trigger correctly and all that stuff. Smoked, I think their average score was, let's say, 280 to 285, which is like 90% out of the 300. And the average score of the Group A, Group B marksmanship was hovering around 260, which is about 75, 80%, which is unreal. The difference between the two. So we're like, hey, can we do this and start pushing it? So we pitched it up in the upper management, and upper management basically said, we can't really well, though we like the results, we can't do it because of CYA. Like, if anything happens out there, we push for speed. We ask them to do things like 6 rounds in the body over and over and over for like 1,000 rounds or whatever it may be. That's going to come back to us if anything ever happens out there in the field. So I kind of understood their part, but at the same time, I'm like, man, this is the institutionalized thing that we're talking about. We're battling this uphill battle of doing one way as opposed to, it's kind of evolving a sense, right? Like right now, I don't want my first time to be real deal. My life is on the line for me to go as fast as I possibly can. I want to have already done that several times in training, kind of understand that weird things happen when you're going super fast. So that's where it is there. And then the ability to be able to process that, going back to the story of me firing 3 rounds, realizing the guy didn't go down yet, firing 3 more rounds, or whatever rounds. It was 3 rounds for me, 6 rounds total. Having the ability to process was just credit to shooting competition for years and years, and the ability to process on what's going on with the shooter, the target, and everything else.
Now that brings me back to like, so earlier in the year, I did some time with the FBI, just working with their firearms instructors, like being able to train their entry level students. And every time after we got done with the string of fire, and after every drill, we would bring them all together, like our bay, into a group, and we talk to them. And it's like, we would tell them, hey, this is a standard, this is a standard that you have to keep, but think past that standard and push yourselves now. That way, whenever you do get in a situation, you already know that you have that covered because you've done it multiple time and time again. And we wouldn't really tell stories about our time in the field or overseas or anything like that, but we would just tell them, hey, these are the repercussions for not being able to perform your job. And I
That's
mean,
crazy.
and it works. And even though there was a specific time standard that they had to keep, we were always pushing them to go further, go faster, get more accurate while putting everything together. And I think most of them qualified with over a 90%.
Wow. I was just gonna say, what were the results of 90%, huh?
Yeah.
That's unreal. That's beautiful. I also started to sorry, give me a second. Oh, just my wife checking on me. We're good. Thank you. So we're good still. Las Vegas Metro, one of my students, was he's a grandmaster, got into the training department, and he started talking about like, hey, what should I focus on? So I told him, focus on the way to manipulate their trigger, and then show them the 2 different ways to manipulate the trigger, whether it's accuracy or speed based. But I want you to push speed a little bit if you can. And so he started fighting this uphill battle of pushing speed, pushing speed, pushing speed. And I wish I still have his text. My phone has this weird thing. Well, I have to save space, I guess. So it deletes after every 30 days. But his text to me was like, dude, these are the initial results of us doing this speed thing. Guys are now passing 95%. And these are the increases from the previous score till I came in and instilled this. And these are the differences in qualification score, passing requirement, and the ability to perform out there in the field. And then same thing in Houston department. We work with them a lot. And then a lot of these guys start talking about like the differences in the approach and training now, because now we've influenced, and like, I like the way you worded it. We've modernized training a little bit more and it, kind of evolve a little bit and added some sort of speed and stress into that game.
Well, JJ, I know we got to get you on your way, but we appreciate you coming on and your answers and giving us your time. Is there anything you'd like to leave our listeners with before we go?
Man, no, it's just thanks for having me, man. It's awesome to be able to talk to the guys out there that are out there putting in the work, right, and allowing us to live the life that we live here. So if you're one of those guys out there, man, I would love for you guys to give it a chance. Go out there and shoot competitions. I was one of the few to start the Team Reconnaissance Sniper Foundation, Team RSF guys, and that was really cool to be a part of that. Now I get a call sometimes, I'm like, man, we're already in our 3rd or 4th ripple effect, and they explained what that meant to me and how far it's come. And now they have an official, gathering at SHOT Show now every year. And those guys support the Marines and get them to go competition and sponsor them and create time and all that stuff. All of us are busy in our own regard. Make sure you prioritize, right? Family first, work and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, figure out a way to make whatever your job is better for you. And then one of the things that in order for you to become better at your job in regards to marksmanship shooting, or as a better operator overall, competition exposes your weaknesses. Not that it gets you killed in the streets or anything like that. It just exposes your weaknesses. It shows you the holes in your game. And you go, all right, I'm not as good as I thought I was. I need to build these foundations a little bit more solid. So next time I get tested, I don't crumble under pressure. And that's all I really want, is just for hopefully people will work harder, dry fire. If not, try competition shooting out, because it really is a big benefit to everyone and anyone behind the gun.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for your time, and to our listeners, leave us a review. Let us know how we're doing, and thanks for listening.